Hi everybody. Before you get started on working through exercise 7 and 8, we're going to do a quick review of time signatures and some other basic music theory so that you're set up for success. So the first thing we need to remember when working with our time signatures is our note values. So if you remember, for note values, we have our whole note, which is 4 counts. We can split our whole note into 2, and we have half notes. Our half notes each get 2 counts, 2 beats. We can split our half notes again in half, and we have quarter notes. Quarter notes are each worth 1 beat, 1 count. Then we can split our quarter notes in half again, and we're left with eighth notes. We can write eighth notes either separated or beamed together. Whenever we have 2 eighth notes together, they like to join together. We call that beaming, which will be lesson 8. So we have our eighth notes, and we can divide those in half again, and we're left with 16th notes. 16th notes look just about the same as eighth notes, but instead of having 1 flag, we have 2 flags. So again, 16th notes. And just like eighth notes, when we have 4 16th notes together, that was a bit too big. When we have 4 16th notes together, then they like to join together and beam together. And we have 4 notes all joined together. So 16th notes have 2 flags, eighth notes have 1 flag, and we join 4 of them together. You'll notice that when we join our 4 16th notes together, that's the equivalent of 1 beat. So that's going to be important for lesson 8 on beaming. That's what's going to be important later. So eighth notes are worth half a count each, and 16th notes would be worth a quarter of a beat each. So a quarter of a beat or a quarter of a count. So there we have our note values. Then note values are actually the same as our rest values. We call them the same thing, they just have a different symbol to use to show that it's silence. So we have a whole rest, which if you think of the whole rest as looking like a hole in the ground, where we have a line and the solid part of the rectangle is underneath that line. It's a whole rest. Whole rest, and it's still 4 counts, the same as our whole note. Then we have our half rest. I like to remember that a half rest looks like a hat. So half and hat sound the same, easy to remember. So it looks like we have the line with the rectangle on top of the line. So being a half rest for 2 counts, 2 beats. Then we get into our quarter rest. The quarter rest looks kind of like a lightning bolt with a C underneath. As long as it's that squiggly kind of line, it'll be fine. So that's the quarter rest. And a quarter rest gets 1 count, just like the quarter note. We can divide those in half again. And now we see the eighth rest. An eighth rest is like the number 7, kind of has a little bit of a ball on the end. Then an eighth rest, and that each gets half a count, just like the eighth note. Note that an eighth rest is not the same as an eighth note, and that they don't join together when we have they don't beam together. If we have two eighth rests side by side, if it occupies the same beat, as we'll see in our time signature, then it would group together as a quarter note, but we don't join them together in any other way. Then we can divide those in half again, and we'll have our 16th rest. The 16th rest looks just about like the 8th rest, but this time it's a 7 with another little tick on it. So we have an 8th rest, and it has another flag on the end, or in the middle. So we have 16th rests. Again, we don't beam them together in any other way, but if we have two 16th rests that are occupying what would be a half a beat, then we would join them together. I'll show that to you when we look at the time signatures. So this is 16th rests, and they're a quarter of a beat. So there we have our basic information that we need to know for our time signatures, the note values and the rest values. So if you remember back to the video we watched last class, when we have a time signature, let's give an example of time signatures, and this is going to be an example of 3/4 time. So if we have a 3/4, the top number tells us how many beats. How many beats per measure. And the bottom number tells us the type of note to get the beat. So in this example, this is saying that we would have 3 quarter notes. So the three beats, and the 4 is quarter notes. So we have 3 quarter note beats in every measure. That would look like this. So a measure of 3/4 is 1, 2, 3, and then a bar line. And then 1, 2, 3, and then another bar line, and so on and so forth. We could have any combination of our note values. So we could have 2/8, we could have 4/16, we could have any combination of those for each beat, meaning that on our note values here, we could also have a 3/4 measure that has a quarter note, 2/8 notes, and 4/16 notes. That's still a 3/4 measure. Then we would have a bar line. So, when you're faced with our exercise, our lesson 7 time signature exercises, in exercise 1, the 3 in the 3/4 time would mean that we have 3 beats in the measure. And what time signature is used for 4 quarter note beats? It would be a 4/4 time. So 4 on the bottom is when we have our quarter notes. So we know the answers to exercise 1 now. Then exercise 2, now it's asking us what time signature is each bar. So each bar should have a different time signature. So in order to solve this question, we need to count the number of beats for each measure. So the first thing is we need to look for our bar line, which we can find right here. And so we are going to count how many beats we have in this space. As soon as we get to the bar line, we reset and go back to 1. So how we do this is we're going to count and we're going to figure out how many beats we have in each one. So we didn't talk about this the last time, but I see that we have a dotted note right here. So let's quickly go back to our previous page and let's remember that a dot, when we add a dot to the note, we add half of the note's value. So if we have a quarter note that has a dot on it, that means that we have the same as a quarter note plus half of its value. So if I look at this page, I know that half of the value of a quarter note half the value of a quarter note is going to be 1/8 note. So that means that my dotted quarter note is the same as the value of a quarter note plus an eighth note. That means I have a value of 1 plus a half. That gives me 1.5 beats. Similarly, if I had an eighth note that has a dot, that's the same as an eighth note plus a 16th note, giving me, let's do this down here, we have half a beat plus a quarter of a beat, which means that I would have 3/4 of a beat. And then finally, let's do one more example going the other way. Let's get bigger. So if we have a half note with a dot, that means that we have a half note plus half of its value, which we know is a quarter note. If we add those values, that's 2 plus 1, giving us 3 beats for our dotted half note. So jumping back over here, in this measure then, we're going to only look at this space. So now we take our pencil and we are going to write the number of beats that we have for each one. Our dotted quarter note, we would have a total of 1.5 beats. Then we have an eighth rest. So eighth rests are worth half a beat each. Then I can see that we have 3 16th notes altogether and a 16th rest. So if I have 3 16th notes and a 16th rest, I can group all of those together already. So just to write those out first, though, we would have a quarter plus a quarter plus a quarter and plus a quarter of a beat. So I know that this whole thing is worth 1 beat. Then I see the same pattern here, the same pattern again, meaning that I have another 1 beat. So now I take those and I add them together. So this gives me 1.5 plus a half, that's 2 beats, plus 1 plus 1. That gives me a total of 4 beats. And it looks like we already know that we have a 4 on the bottom, since we've only learned about time signatures that have a 4 on the bottom. So for this exercise, we would say it's 4/4 time. Then you move on to the next measure. So this one, we would have to do the same process. Now we count up the number of beats that we see in this measure, and then we write our time signature at the start of the bar. You do that for each of the measures in this exercise. Then the next exercise is adding bar lines to each of the melodies. So now we have to do this the opposite way. We still need to know how many beats. So in this first example, it's a 2/4 measure. Remember that a 2/4 measure means that we have 2 quarter notes per measure, per bar. So we have 2 quarter note beats per measure. So I already know that I have 2 beats for every half note. So I would neatly write 1 bar line here. Then I find my next 2 beats. So I know that one's 2, this is a 1.5. I know that 2 16th notes together, that's going to be half a beat. So these 2 notes together are half a beat. That gives me a total of 2 beats. So I would draw another neat bar line here. And I keep going until I've finished and found all the way to the end of this line. Then I repeat the same for the second line, but this one is in 3/4 time, and my last one is in 4/4 time. So that's how you would complete exercise 3 of finding where the bar lines go. It's simple addition to figure out how many beats we have until we write another bar line. So double check your math, make sure that you haven't gone over 2 beats for the measure, or 3 beats, or 4 beats for each measure. And that's all we really need to know for time signatures.